Hey, Vinyl community, welcome to another episode where we are going to be talking about the Beach Boys. I've got my good friend Matt Phillips with me, who you may have seen on the other channel that he contributes to, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We did an episode a little over a month ago where we ranked our top 10 Beach Boys songs of the 1960s. Now we are covering the 1970s, and we've got a list. We've got our top 10, but we've also allowed ourselves 5 honorable mentions. And so, for me, this was a difficult list to put together. The 60s is my favorite Beach Boys era, although I think there's a lot to appreciate in the 1970s. I'm not trying to diminish what the Beach Boys accomplished in the 1970s, but how difficult was this for you, Matt, to put your list together?
The list itself, the top 10, was not actually difficult at all. I think it's funny that we're probably going to be talking about a lot of songs that, unless you're really into the Beach Boys, if you just have sort of a passing knowledge about the band, a lot of these songs you're not even going to know what we're talking about. But hopefully you'll dig into them and find some of these songs and check them out. My top 10 list has been pretty much the same since I got into them. It was the honorable mentions and then the sort of almost made it to my list that took me like a couple of days to really put together.
Right. Well, it's a fun list to put together. Yeah, like you say, I think most people who just have a passing interest in the Beach Boys, they're going to know all their 60s work up through about Good Vibrations, probably. And then the late 60s stuff is pretty obscure. Do It Again, people might recognize. Maybe Darlin', I don't know. Really, it depends on regionally what has been played on your classic rock radio. But yeah, for me, there's a lot to discover. And I guess if you're a Beach Boys fan and you're not all that familiar with the 1970s, I would definitely recommend you check some of this stuff out, because there really is a lot to like. There's a lot to hate. Let's not, sugarcoat it. But there is some really great stuff that the Beach Boys did put out, albeit with varying degrees of participation from Brian Wilson. But let's go through your honorable mentions first, Matt.
Yeah, so let me just add one little quick detail before we get going. So we're talking about the period of 1970 to 1979, and some people might not even realize that the Beach Boys actually put out 8 albums in that period, from all the way from 1970 to 1979. And their record companies put out some compilations. They did a live album, so they were pretty prolific. It was like 70, 71, 72, 73. It took a little break, and it was 76, 77, 78, 79, like an album a year still during that time period.
And there was a lot of meddling actually from the record company during that time, because the original version of Sunflower was going to be called Add Some Music. And record company didn't like that. They said, it was a new record company, Reprise. They'd been on Capitol Records prior to that. Got a new record company. They submit their album to the record company and they're like, yeah, we can't accept this. You need to go back to the drawing board. You need to rework some of these songs. You need to give us an album that sounds more commercial. They did the same thing, I think, with the Holland album. They're like, we don't really hear a single here. Why don't you go back and give us an album we can actually do something with? Beach Boys wanted to put out a second Christmas album in the 1970s. Record company said, no, don't think so. No, thank you. So the Beach Boys reworked some of those songs for the MIU album, took the Christmas lyrics out of them and then reworked them into just kind of generic a song. So the record company definitely, did not have a whole lot of confidence in the Beach Boys. I think particularly in the early 70s, when they were thought of as, well, they're passe, they're past their prime. Although they were still a big live act, they were still a big draw in Europe. They were very popular overseas. And then it wasn't until that Endless Summer compilation came out in, what was that, 1976?
74, yeah.
74, yeah. That there was this, like, people got into the Beach Boys again and were rediscovering their catalog. And people kind of were rethinking the Beach Boys and what they meant in terms of being an American band and what value they had musically. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
So a lot of these songs I actually first heard back in the 80s when I picked up a cassette of their live album. It's just called The Beach Boys in Concert. I think it came out in 1973. So probably just after the Holland album had come out.
Mhm.
So you want to go through some honorable mentions?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go quickly through mine. And then if you want to talk about any of them specifically, be my guest. I'm
Okay.
going to throw a little bit of a curveball. I've got 5 honorable mentions. The first one is "Still I Dream of It," which actually didn't actually find its way onto an album, did it? It was written
I
in
don't know,
19.
and I've got a friend, Chris Profi, who has a bootleg of an album called Adult Child. And,
Yep.
would that have found its way onto that album that was never made its way to market?
Yeah, yeah. So it was written in 1977, and I don't think I heard that song until, did it appear on the 1993 box set?
Yeah, Good
Yeah,
Vibrations, it did.
yeah. And then Brian actually did a re-record of it on his "I Just Wasn't Made for These Times" album in 1995. So, and I like that version too. So that's my number 5 for my honorable mentions. Another honorable mention, just barely didn't make the cut. "It's Okay" from 15 Big Ones. And I think that's pretty much the only one from that album to make my list.
Yeah, I am not spoiler alert, but I don't have any songs from that album on there. I'm not a huge fan. I know it was their supposed to be, comeback album. It was the first studio album they released after the Endless Summer compilation. But yeah, I mean, it's not an awful album, but it's just not my favorite. I'm a bigger fan of some of their other stuff.
My third honorable mention is "All This Is That" from an album title that really confused me as a kid. Carl and the Passions, "So Tough." What? What is that?
Yeah. Well, I think that came from, I think the Beach Boys, before they were actually known as the Beach Boys, they'd gone through some different names like the Pendletones. And I think one of the names that they had come up, sort of like if you're a Beatles fan, Johnny and the Moondogs was a name that had been thrown around in the early days of the Beatles. I think Carl and the Passions was at one time a name under consideration. Maybe the Beach Boys had even done a performance or two under that name. So I think that's where it came from. And I almost was wondering, like, were you trying to make this like a Sergeant Pepper where we're assuming the identity of a different band? This is Beach Boys, is Carl and the Passions. And so that's
Yeah.
what I have always thought about that album anyway.
Yeah. I don't think I have a lot from that album on my major list as well. My fourth honorable mention would be, I'm curious to see what you think about this one. "Disney Girls" bracket 1957, Bruce Johnson song from
I
the
do like
Surf's Up.
that.
Oh, you do
Yeah,
like it? Okay.
I don't like a whole lot of Bruce Johnson stuff. I feel like it's a little too mushy and a little too closer to like the stuff he wrote for Barry Manilow, but
Yeah.
I do like that one. I think Disney Girls is a fantastic. That's off Surf's Up. But yeah, I do like that one a lot.
Okay. And my final honorable mention would be "The Trader" from Holland. So is that a song sort of about like, we know about the Dutch kind of trade as far as like trading goods and unfortunately, the other kind of trade, but I'm not really sure exactly what that song is about. Like it sort of tells a story, but I don't know, I really like the song.
Yeah, I've never really gone back and kind of researched what the lyrics were referring to or anything like that. But yeah, it's a fantastic song. I think Tom Petty singled that out as his all-time favorite Beach Boys,
Oh,
if I'm not
oh
mistaken.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that one just barely, it just missed my top 10. So you're going to hear about a lot about that album.
Okay. No, I like that. I like that album a lot too, actually. As a matter of fact, Holland is one of my favorites from the 70s, as you'll see as I go through my list. But, my some of my stuff on here might surprise you, Matt, a little bit actually too, because there's some stuff that I, for whatever reason, have always connected with and enjoyed. But my, I'm going to go 15 through 11 since we're doing like a top 10. But my, First honorable mention is going to be Love Surrounds Me.
Oh, okay.
LA Light album. Always like that. I think it's a great Dennis vocal. And was that supposed to be on the Bamboo album, like his second solo album that was
Oh, yeah.
actually
Yeah,
released?
I think so.
Yeah, and then he ended up. I think they kind of pressured him to put some of those compositions on a Beach Boys album. I know Mike Love in particular was not happy about the fact that Dennis was going off and doing his solo records. He felt that was kind of diluting the Beach Boys material that they had to record with, but I think that's a great song. I'm also going back to the Light album for my next track, which is Good Timin', which I know is going to shock people, but I love the harmonies on that. It's got, it really reminds me so much of like the best of the Beach Boys 60s work, albeit their early 60s work, but I think it's a melody. I think it's just sort of a nostalgic kind of a lyric. And I love how their harmonies are floating all over the place. Woo, you know, all that is just like, that's ear candy for me. And I couldn't resist. I love that opening track on that album. Number 13, I'm going to go to the Holland album for Steamboat.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of, yeah, it's not a standout track for most people on there. It's just kind of got a plodding quality to it, but there's just something about it that I really enjoy a lot. Number 12, I'm going to go to the Beach Boys Love You album for the title or the first track, Let Us Go On This Way. I like that one a lot. You know, that album, I feel, I think people give it a lot of credit because, well, it's all Brian Wilson. It's Brian Wilson sort of doing his 70s version of, it's the closest thing to Pet Sounds in the 1970s because it's all Brian. Brian's fully invested in this album. He's really in the producer's chair, giving it his full attention. But it's just overly, like all the keyboards and the synths on there, it's very keyboard heavy for me. The whole synthesizer thing, after a while, I'm like, you know, a little different texture here, but I mean, I get it, whatever. It's quirky and people like it for that very reason. But, and then my number 11 is going to be Funky Pretty. Yeah, also off. I got so many Holland tracks on my list, but I love that one. You know, it's sort of like, the lyrics sound a little bit dated now because they're all talking about, well, what's your astrological sign? And it's kind of very much like that. Oh, 70s hippie-ish. What's your sign? Are you a Capricorn or Pisces and all that stuff? But I don't care. I think it's a cool melody. I love, it's just kind of got this quirky synthesizer, you know, that whole thing.
Yeah.
And ahead of its time too. Like there were no other bands that I'm aware of anyway that were building a song based off that kind of synthesizer keyboard riff. So those are my honorable mentions.
Yeah, we're off to a good start, and no one's picked the disco version of "Here Comes the Night," so we're good.
Yeah, well, it still might be on there.
Oh,
no, I'm kidding. No, all right, that will not be on my list. Rest assured. So Matt, what's your number 10?
All right, digging into our top 10. You have to throw another little curveball here. So I mentioned that they have 8 albums in this period, and the track I'm going to talk about actually came off the Sunflower album, which sadly is the only album from that period that I don't actually own. So I don't know if you have a copy of that one, Jeff, but I haven't been able to find it on vinyl yet. Awesome. So yeah, it's only after doing quite a bit of reading about the Beach Boys that I learned about how many great albums they had in the 70s, because we around here, we just never heard anybody talking about that stuff. You'd never hear it on the radio. So the first song, anyway, not to delay it any further, my number 10 is from Sunflower. It's called This Whole World. That album came out in 1970. I didn't actually hear it until it arrived on the 1993 box set. I think it was on, yeah, it's on one of these CDs. So it's got that kind of, was it this one?
Yeah, you know, he also did a version of it. You had mentioned that I just wasn't made for these.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
also on that CD. He did a rework.
yeah. I like the line, when girls get mad at boys and go, many times they're just putting on a show. It's like, to me, it actually sounds like, other than the kind of cheesy lyrics, it's sort of like a modern take on a Smile track to me. It feels like it could have been written during that period, but they updated a little bit. And but the version that I have actually listened to the most is the one that you just showed from I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. That version was produced by Don Was, I believe.
Yep.
And uh, the original song had this kind of twinkling ding ding kind of triangle thing going on in the background, and they replaced some of that stuff in the Don Was version with piano, updated it a little bit. But yeah, I really love that tune. So
Yeah, I
that's my
love
number
those
10.
deep bass vocals. You know, you got
Yeah.
that in the background, kind of carrying that melody along. I love that part. Yeah, no, that's a great track, and might be on my list actually. So I am gonna go to for my number 10. I'm gonna go to the Love You album, and I'm gonna pick a song that was actually I first heard it on the 1993 Good Vibrations box set. I'll Bet She's Nice. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, which and that's a Dennis vocal, and I'm surprised how many Dennis songs I've got on my list here. And Dennis really kind of came into his own in the 1970s. Not that he wrote this song, or you know, this is not a song you typically associate with Dennis, but I like it. I think it's kind of a charming little song, and the keyboard's a little weird and wonky, but I don't know. It lends it a little bit of personality. So I'm going with that one.
awesome.
Yeah, that I think is the last song I've got from my list off the Love You album.
Oh, okay. All right. My number 9, you've actually already talked about this song. It's Funky Pretty from the Holland album. Um, I actually first heard that song on, so the Beach Boys we talked about earlier, they did this live album in 1973. And I would have had this on cassette, and I believe it appears on, yeah. So on the second vinyl on side 3 is Funky Pretty. So it's got those astrological lyrics like you mentioned. Her calendar is not like ours, all that kind of stuff. So I actually I didn't realize until I went researching this song. I looked at it's called the bridge of the song, and they mentioned all these different cities throughout the world. I didn't realize the Queen in Copenhagen, the Dream of Amsterdam, the Cream of Gay Paris, the theme of USAC, the scene in Great Britain, the meaning in Los Angeles. Like I was like, what? I don't remember those parts of the lyrics. But
No,
I
I
guess I
wasn't
never
sure
really
what he
heard
was
that.
saying, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that's my number 9. I really like, for all the same reasons that you had mentioned before.
Well, good.
I
I'm
mean, the
glad.
Beach Boys doing a little bit of funk and Beach Boy style. So
Well, good. I'm glad we're in agreement on that one, because I was thinking I was maybe a little outside the mainstream. But my number 9 is, again, I'm going back to the Light album. Now, the Light album, if you read anything up on the Beach Boys or any kind of critical analysis of the Beach Boys work, I've got a few Beach Boys biographies, and they always take a dump on this album. They always dismiss
yeah,
it. They say this album's garbage. You know, the Beach Boys were not getting along during this period. They were barely speaking to each other. You kind of had the two camps. You had like the Mike Love, Al Jardine, Brian Wilson camp. And then you had Dennis Wilson and Carl Wilson, who were in a separate camp. They were always fighting. I'm surprised that this album actually even got made. But, you know, there's a lot to like off here. Of course, the disco version of Here Comes the Night is not one of them. And, you know, and it's like, God, I wish they could have just put that out as maybe a standalone single or a B-side, because it really does date this album pretty terribly. But the rest of this album, in my opinion, there's a lot to love. And my number 9 pick is going to be Baby Blue off of here.
oh yeah,
I really like that one a lot. I love it's just, and there's a lot of quiet, and that's why Here Comes the Night is such a jarring track to have on this album, because it doesn't fit the mood or the rest of the album. I mean, Good Timin' is up and bubbly and positive, but the rest of it is kind of a subdued album. When you take off Good Timin' and you get rid of Here Comes the Night, the rest of it is kind of more very introspective, kind of softer, quiet, but I do think it works. And I think Baby Blue is a great track. And Baby Blue is sort of a cliche. How many tracks, how many songs have been recorded with Baby Blue in the title? I mean, Badfinger, Bob Dylan, so many artists had used that, but I don't know. I still think that it's a great track, and that's going to be my number 9.
Love it. I like how it goes from Carl and then it goes to Dennis. So they're kind of like the lead vocals on that song. That one just barely missed my honorable mention. So very cool.
Yeah, that was kind of a Carl and Dennis album. Those were really the two Beach Boys that shine on there. I mean, Mike Love only, I think Mike Love's only got one track on there. Brian Wilson is barely on it at all. If you can find Brian Wilson there somewhere, you really got to dig deep and listen hard to hear him. But I mean, although he did your Short and Bread, I guess was Brian Wilson's contribution, if you want to call it that. But
when you refer to that album, do you call it the LA Light Album? Like, is it Los Angeles Light Album, or is the LA stand for Light Album, or what's the?
Yeah, I think Light Album, and I've seen it at least in the liner notes to the CD version of that. Carl talks about the fact that they called it Light Album, light meaning like a spiritual light. They wanted to have this be like a very spiritual kind of album. And then there was the irony of, well, Light Album also are the same initials for Los Angeles, which is, you know, the Beach Boys were an LA band. So I think there's sort of that, like, yeah, it's LA stands for Light Album, or LA Los Angeles. It's kind of got a double meaning there.
Right on. Now we're on to my number 8, is from the Surf's Up album. So this one came out in 1971, and my number 8 is Long Promised Road. It's one of I think it's one of Carl's most tender vocals, although it has a really raucous kind of chorus once he gets down into it. And it's actually kind of a political song. So I think anyone interested in the kind of times that we're living in right now, go check out Long Promised Road. It's got, I hit hard at the battle that's confronting me, yeah. You know, throw all the shackles that are binding me down. It's got some, you know, not kind of stuff that you would associate with a Beach Boys record. And I actually heard just recently they're coming out with another Beach Boys documentary, and they've based it on this song called Long Promised Road. You're going to see Bruce Springsteen, Taylor Hawkins, Elton John are apparently all in this documentary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the thing that kind of confuses me a bit, I always obviously associate that song with Carl. But of course, on the poster, they've got a vintage photo of Brian Wilson at the helm, probably during Pet Sounds. And then they've got like a overlaid older photo of Brian when he was kind of in his drugged out period. So curious to see how that goes. I don't think we need another retelling of the Beach Boys story, but yeah, I'll watch it when it comes out. So yeah, that's Long Promised Road.
Yeah, that's something to look forward to. And actually, Surf's Up album is that really kind of got a lot of social commentaries on here. You got Don't Go Near the Water, which obviously is kind of a statement on the environment. Student Demonstration Time is on here. A Day in the Life of a Tree is also, you know, got some social commentary, some environmental, an environmental message behind that. So yeah, this was sort of the Beach Boys getting into the political arena a little bit, in which they'd never done before. So a very interesting album in that regard. Well, my number 8 is going to be off the Carl and the Passions album. I'm going to go with It Takes a Mess Up. You Need a Mess of Help to Stand Alone.
Oh, okay.
It's just called You Need a Mess of Help, but essentially that's the lyric there. I don't know, you know, and it's weird because they brought in Blondie Chaplin and
Ricky Fattar.
Ricky Fattar. And it's like, what are these guys doing in the Beach Boys? Not that I was around. I mean, I was around them, but I was like 2 years old. So
Yeah.
the whole, that period of the Beach Boys, I wasn't really, obviously listening to at the time, but kind of like looking back and discovering the Beach Boys 70s catalog, it's like, oh, why do they add these guys? They already had like 5 members. What are they doing? They're trying to be like Earth, Wind, and Fire and, have as many people as possible. But, and I know it's, but I like some of that album, and that's one of the tracks I like. I think it's a good kind of rocking song. I love at the end where they kind of breaks into that little I love that where it just sort of like takes a little break there and settles down a bit and then gets back into the chorus. Yeah, I don't know. I've got a fondness for that song. I like it a lot. It's my favorite song probably on that album.
Awesome. My number 7 is Add Some Music to Your Day, again from the Sunflower album. I don't have that album, but they did a pretty good version on, Brian Wilson did this live at the Roxy Theater. I think this came out before he finally decided to do the whole Pet Sounds live and then the Smile Project live, but this was kind of the same, I think it's the Wondermints band, and they did quite a few really good deep cuts on the Beach Boys catalog on there. So add some music to your day. So it's kind of about all the places that you might accidentally hear some music or get a chance to put some music and kind of brighten up your attitude. I think it's kind of funny because it's like you've got your Brian writing, I don't know if he wrote any of the lyrics, but it sounds like kind of the simple stuff he would have done on Friends, like the play, and then Mike comes in with his sort of the world could come together as one if everybody under the sun could add some music, add in his sort of all the people kind of vibe to it. So I really dig that too.
The melody on that and just the whole feel of that song reminds me a little bit of Salt Lake City from the Summer Nights album a little bit. If you listen to the two side by side, you can almost, it's got that feel to it. It feels like more kind of a hearkening back to the mid 60s period Beach Boys. But yeah, that's a great track. I mean, that's what they wanted to add some music to be the title of that album, but because that was a great, strong song. But
if you want to see sort of what some of the Beach Boys have been up to lately, back in March, you had Mike and Al and Bruce and David. You had the Wilson sisters and some of the touring band. They actually did a cover of Add Some Music to Your Day and put it on YouTube. It was, I think it was to raise money for Feeding America, but it's kind of an interesting, socially distanced kind of, let's everybody sing a little bit of verse from this song, and somebody's going to be in their home, somebody's going to be at the beach, Al's going to be playing his guitar, and check that version out. I think it's fairly heavily processed, the video, the audio, but it's still kind of interesting. So,
well, very, very cool. I'll have to check that out. I wasn't aware of that. But speaking of Sunflower, that is going to be the track that I choose for my number 7. I'm going to go with This Whole World, which you'd already covered. We'd already talked about, so we don't really need to go into that anymore. But I really like that album. I like both versions. I like that version. I like the one on I Just Wasn't Made for These Times.
Awesome. My number 6 is actually, well, it's technically 3 songs, but it's called the California Saga. So it's off of Holland, and it's made up of 3 tracks. So the California Saga is Big Sur, The Beaks of Eagles, and then the song California, which I think if they've put it on any kind of compilation or any kind of box set, they've just called it California. Or sometimes you see it broken out as On My Way to Sunny California from the lyrics. So it's actually like a 10-minute piece. And I thought of this the other day. So Quentin Tarantino sort of had his Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was his tribute to kind of growing up in that area, in that era. And of course, the Beach Boys, when they went to Holland, they were desperately missing all the things that they loved about California, and they wrote this kind of saga. Kind of starts off with Mike's got his typical kind of folky lyrics, and then it slows down. You hear flute, and Mike starts reciting a poem. It's called The Beaks of Eagles. I think it was a poem from like 1936 by an author named Robinson Jeffries. Anyway, I used to listen to this all the time. My dad gave me one of his old stereos. And for whatever reason, it would always skip records at a certain point. It wasn't anything to do with the record. It would just skip at a certain point. So I actually got used to hearing this song always skipping at a certain point. I'd have to go in and fix it. But yeah, I've always had an affinity for that saga.
Yeah, no, that's a good track. And they, I think that, like you say, it's true that California, the last part of that trilogy is always the one that you hear. But it's an interesting composition. I mean, it just shows the Beach Boys taking risks, trying to branch out a little bit. They wanted to do some stuff they hadn't done before. I mean, they moved to Holland to record that whole album, which in and of itself was kind of a bold move. They wanted to have a different atmosphere and a different feel. But yeah, that's kind of at the heart of that album. And I think that's great. That almost, like you say, almost made my list. It was like if we had a 16, that would have been on there for sure. Again, ironically, my number 6 is going to come from the Holland album also. And I am going to go with The Traitor, which you already covered on here. Love that song. I think it's a great Carl vocal. Yeah, it's one of my favorites on that album. And I love Holland. Holland might be my favorite Beach Boys album of the 70s. But again, there's a lot of great stuff there to choose from. But Holland would be one. If you are not familiar with that record, definitely check it out. Does your version have the single or the 45, the EP? The Brian Wilson
it does. Trying to find it here. I had it pulled out. Yeah. This thing.
Yeah, very cool. Those are I've not yet found that in any of the copies I've run across. So.
Yeah. Oh, mine's got a bit of dirt on there, but yeah, I'm
very cool. Rarity.
If I ever come across one, I'll pick it up for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
On my number, so we might as well just stay on the Holland album because my number 5 is actually Sail On Sailor from the same album. As a kid, I actually couldn't figure out who was singing the vocals on this song. I hadn't realized that they found these guys in the Flame who are from South Africa. We'd already talked about Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fattar. And I think it's Blondie singing lead on this song, Sail On Sailor.
Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a big hit for them. I think they re-released it like 16 months later, and it barely cracked the top 50. But it's one of those songs that I kind of wish that had been a bit more of a hit for the Beach Boys. Now, I did finally, just one more thing, I did actually finally get to see this song live. Brian Wilson. So I've seen the Beach Boys in different configurations. I saw Brian Wilson on one of his solo tours. And of course, he had Blondie Chaplin with him. And this was in 2017. And they did the California Saga, and they did Sail On Sailor and some of those kind of deeper cuts. So I was pretty overjoyed with that. I think a lot of the older crowd sitting around me were a little bit confused by some of the songs in this part of the set, but yeah.
Well, Sail On Sailor was the one that they put that track on there at the last minute because the record company's like, we don't hear a single, this album's boring and bland, we need something to liven it up. And they found a demo that Brian had done with Van Dyke Parks, and Van Dyke Parks actually gave this to the Beach Boys and were like, you need to hear this. This is the song that you need on this album. They re-recorded it. It didn't have Brian's vocal. I wish it had, because I feel that would have given it more the Beach Boys signature sound that it was missing. But it's still a great track. And Blondie's a great singer, so I'm not knocking his vocal on that at all. I just wish it had been either Carl or Brian who had done the, or even Al who had done the lead on that. But you know, it didn't happen, and it is what it is. But that's a great track. My number 5 is going to come from the Sunflower album. I'm going to go with Cool Cool Water, which feels like it was a leftover Smile track that they took and reworked, repurposed it for this album. But I think it's fantastic. I love it. It's just a journey from start to finish. I love the vocals, the playful vocals there. They're just kind of floating in and out. And then you've got the water sound, the water, the whole
Wow,
which,
wow, wow, wow. Yeah. Yes,
yeah. And it does it for me. It works for me. I'm really fond of that track because I love the whole Smile project. So of course that was going to be the one that I connected with the most on that. But yeah.
All right, my number 4 is actually still from the Surf's Up album. It's Till I Die. I'm just going to show another version that they played. I think Brian re-recorded it on his I Just Wasn't Made for These Times CD.
Yeah, they did.
So Till I Die, I mean, going from the title and kind of the music behind it, it sounds very, I think I read on the internet, it sounds like an existential crisis. I think that's a pretty good way of summing up this song. I'm a cork on the ocean, floating over the raging sea. How deep is the ocean? I lost my way. I've loved this song since I heard it. But it's more positive than it actually sounds.
Yeah, the Beach Boys originally didn't want to put it on the album because they're like, "This song's a bummer, Brian. What are you writing lyrics like this for?" But yeah, I've also heard it described as like a real accurate description of clinical depression. Somebody who's feeling like, "Well, what does it matter? I'm so small. I'm so insignificant in the grand scheme of the whole universe." But it communicates it so effectively. It's not this pretentious lyric. It's not trying to be overly wordy. I mean, and Brian wrote that, which is. It blows my mind because there's some lyrics that Brian has written that is so trite to be embarrassing. And then you've got him writing lyrics like this, which is so profound. And it's like, wow, that is such a great way to capture, like you say, that whole existential crisis there. But yeah, I love that track, and it's going to be on my list somewhere still. So. Well, my number 4, I am going to go to that album, the Surf's Up album. Also, it seems like all our picks are from as we go along are from the same albums, but I'm going to go with Feel Flows. 4. I love that. I love the guitar at the end. I love and I don't know the keyboard sound, but it's yeah. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, the kind of that chugging.
Yep.
Dude, I can't replicate it with my voice. I'm not that talented, but yeah, I love it. It almost sounds like Carl's vocal is a little bit underwater. Also, everything about it has got an otherworldly sense about it. And I love the guitar at the end. That's a great guitar. Like you got some flute in there, too, along there. But yeah, that's always been one of my favorites off that record.
Awesome. Might be talking about that one a little bit later.
Okay.
We're on to my top 3. This was a pretty easy choice for me. But actually the original version that I heard, well, I'll get into this in a second, wasn't the original version. My number 3 is Forever. Of course, off the Sunflower album. I would say this is kind of like a signature song for Dennis Wilson. If every word I said could make you laugh, I'd talk forever. Mm-hmm. I mean, what else can I say, right? Although the last line just kills me. So I've gone away, but not forever. I'm sure he's kind of talking about going off on tour, whoever he's with. I'm going off on tour for a while, but I'll love you my way, when I come back. But, after losing Dennis Wilson, I think that line hits a little bit different. So
yeah, it's kind of prophetic in a way that he had never intended. It's almost a bit of a self-eulogy or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, no, that's a great track. And
The first version of that I actually heard was from this wonderful album,
Ooh.
Summer in Paradise on 1992. Flip it over.
Well, and you didn't think the song could get any better, but when you hear John Stamos do the vocals, it's like, oh, it's transcendent now.
Yeah. And I hadn't actually heard it in a while. I just listened to it again today. And it's even got a little bit of, I don't know, you'd call it like a hair metal kind of guitar solo. And
that's another reason. I mean, there's like 500 reasons to hate that album. I mean, that's got to be like number one, number two, what they said to, that Dennis Wilson track, the fact that they shit all over that track by having John Stamos sing at number one, and then the heavy-handed production that they threw on it is just, it's an abomination. But anyway, my number three, I'm going to go back to the Holland album for the last time, Sail on Sailor. Had to put that on my
nice.
It is my number three. We've already talked about it, so I won't belabor it, but yeah, that's a great track.
All right, we're almost at number one. My number two track is, you've talked about this one, Feel Flows. Started side two of the Surf's Up album. I actually love the version that's on the Warmth of the Sun CD. So this is actually a really good, we might have talked about this one before when we did our 60s video, but this has got a really good collection of 60s and 70s songs. So definitely check that one out. So Feel Flows. This one got kind of a bit of a boost when, I don't know if you've seen the movie Almost Famous.
I have not. So believe it or not, I haven't. Yeah.
This one came out in 2000, so I can't believe this movie is over 20 years old now. It was actually used a couple of times. Cameron Crowe used Feel Flows, and a few other Beach Boys songs, more well-known Beach Boys songs, but got a little bit of prominence on that movie. And I actually heard, you know how the Beach Boys have been doing this, like they did like a 1967 kind of compilation album. I heard they were supposed to be doing a 1969 to 71 box set. They were talking about that. We haven't heard anything more about it, but it was supposed to be called Feel Flows as far as I know. So.
Yeah, I've heard rumors about that. I've heard that there's one of my channels that I watch, Giga, had actually talked about that a little bit, that they were anticipating a release on that this year. Hopefully it happens, but you never know. I mean, my fear is that they'll release it as a streaming only album, like
because
those Beach Boys. They release a whole bunch of Beach Boys albums on streaming only or available only for download, like not in a physical format, which is a real bummer. But hopefully they'll at least issue that on vinyl and CD if they do at all. So all right, my number two, we've already talked about it. I'm going with Forever. Again, Dennis Wilson. Everybody had always thought of like Dennis as the Ringo in the band, and not just because he was the drummer. They just thought, well, Dennis is the best looking in the band and he says the least, and you just throw a Dennis vocal on there because you feel like, well, we got to have Dennis on here somewhere, so what can we have him sing? Even though, some of the songs, like In the Back of My Mind, I love that track. I think that's a great, Dennis vocal, but he'd never been known for composing anything unless you count Denny's drums, that drum solo that he did on an early Beach Boys album. But he definitely came into his own after Brian Wilson kind of stepped back a little bit, and the other Beach Boys were really kind of thrust into the role of producing and writing. Dennis came into his own, and Brian Wilson said as much. And Brian really was Dennis Wilson's biggest fan, and was always promoting Dennis's songs and saying what a great songwriter Dennis was, and Forever definitely proves that.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're on to our number one pick. And
well, my number one, it's probably not too hard to guess, but it's the key track off of Surf's Up, of course, the song Surf's Up. It was the second song Brian Wilson and Van Dyke Parks actually ever wrote together. So it's kind of back during that period. And they were writing about a man that was overtaken by music and just like that feeling of wow. And it's got, of course, in the history of the Beach Boys, it's got some of those lyrics that they always talk about that Van Dyke wrote, and then some of the other members of the band, Mike Love, kind of were like, what is this song about exactly? And Van Dyke's like, I don't really need to explain it to you, figure it out.
Right. No, that's a great one. I love that. And excellent pick. I wanted to pick that one, and I'm like, I wanted that to make my list, and then it just didn't.
It didn't make your list.
I was kind of thinking like, well, it's more like Smile. Is it like a
yeah
track? And that is probably my favorite track off that album. My number one is actually on that album, and it's one that you already talked about. It is Till I Die. Is going to be my number one. And the first time I heard it, actually, it was on a compilation that I have. It's called Endless Harmony. And it's a documentary that was done, but it's a different version. It's got a longer lead in. You've got like the vibraphone at the beginning, which I think is very cool, because on this, it just starts right in, and I'm up to work on the, like, whoa.
Yeah.
It was used to the version where it's got like a longer instrumental lead in. That's kind of my favorite version of that. Although, I mean, we're talking 70s, so I got to go with the version on here, but still, I think it's a beautiful song. It really reminds me of, Brian Wilson's great songwriting. Could have been on, a Smile outtake or something that it's got that feel to it. But yeah, that's my number one. And you're going through your list, I'm like, Long Promised Road. How did I not have that in here? But I'm not going to cheat and throw it on there last minute. But
yeah, there was quite a few songs. The Night Was So Young. All I Want to Do, which some people think is like started the whole chill shoegaze kind of genre. I guess that's a thing.
Yeah.
The song Marcella from Carl and the Passion's So Tough. Actually, one of my best friends growing up, his mom was named Marcella. So I was like, okay. And the Al song, Lady Linda, for some reason, I've already had a affinity for that one. Again, I think because it appeared on that live album from 1973. So yeah.
Well, there's a lot here to check out. Like I say, if you're not familiar with any of these albums, I would start anywhere but the MIU album or 50 Big Ones. I would avoid those. You really have to be a completist, at least to my way of thinking, before. 15 Big Ones was one of the last Beach Boy albums that I picked up. I put it off. I mean, it's in every record bin. You go in any record store, flip through the Beach Boys section, you're going to find 15 Big Ones in there. So I just kind of stayed away. I'm like, I know I'm going to find it when I need to. But I'm just like putting it off because I just don't really like that album, and I don't have anything off on my list there. But I'm okay. If I had to pick one, I'm okay would be the one. But yeah, so this is a fun list to do. I don't think we'll be doing a 1980s Beach Boys list. Be a short list. But I did have fun doing the 60s and 70s with you, Matt, and hopefully we can do some more videos together because we do have a lot of music that we agree on and both are passionate about. So thanks so much for joining me on this episode, and make sure you also check Matt out on Tim's channel, Tim Derling, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, where Matt contributes quite frequently too. So
right on. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great day.